Today is Thursday, June 25, 2020. I'm the interviewer. My name is Nicole Morin Scribner. And today I'm interviewing Quinton, who also goes by Skip Wilson. I am interviewing from my home in Maine, and we're doing this over the telephone. And Skip is at his home in Troy, New York. So, good afternoon, Troy. I'm glad that we were able to make this connection.
Thank you.
And the way that I usually start these interviews is at the beginning by asking you when and where you were born.
Uh, 1958, Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, Rhode Island. Okay.
Yeah, December 15th.
Okay. So, where this is the Voices of Biddeford, I'm very curious to find out how did you get from Providence, Rhode Island to Biddeford, Maine?
My father worked for General Dynamics at the shipyard in Groton, Connecticut, and he got another job and transferred to General Electric, their submarine turbine section in South Portland when that plant opened.
So he was there when that plant opened?
Yeah, right where it opened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell me about your father. First of all, what's his name?
Oh wow. This is a loaded question. He's a senior, Quinton James Wilson Senior, and I was born when both of my parents, who were only 9 days apart in age, were both 40. So I was kind of a late baby. But we moved to Maine, and initially it was not the easiest transition. My father found I can remember driving in the car looking for just a place to spend the night. My father had been there maybe 2 months before my mother and I came, and he was staying at the Y in Portland. And needless to say, the point is, we had trouble initially finding housing. The first residence in Maine was a summer house in Hills Beach. That's how I got in the Biddeford school system.
How old were you? How old were you when you made the move to Biddeford?
Uh, 7.
Okay.
Yep. And that's also how I ended up at Kennedy Elementary, which started the whole ball rolling from there. But then there was a bad storm, and the house got hit pretty hard, and we had to move out. So from there, the only place I can remember driving around, like my mother was crying, it was awful. And we ended up renting a weekly rental at the Blaine Motel headed into South Portland. I don't know if you remember, but before they made that expressway, the only way getting into Portland was to go the old way, over the old bridge. And it was right at the beginning of that bridge, and I'm sure it's still there, the Blaine Motel. And every morning my mom we'd drive my dad to work, drop him off, and then my mother would drive from South Portland to Biddeford to drop me off at school.
Wow.
And that went on for, maybe it's so funny because relatively, as a kid, it seems like it went on forever. But it probably only went on for maybe 6 months. And then, now this is a funny thing that happened. Then we moved from the Blaine Motel to the Saco Motel in one of those kitchenette thingies in the back, right next to Thornton Field. It's that yellow motel right next to, I don't know if it's still there, I'm sure it is, right next to Thornton's football field. And what happened as a result of that was I continued to go to Kennedy Elementary, so I was in the Biddeford school system, but my friends at that point were all kids from Saco, kids that would eventually become like rivals of mine. But there were a ton of kids that were all my friends in Saco. The Nathansons and the Foggs and some of the names that have been there forever. I think that's so funny. And then we'd do the same thing. We'd get up. My mother would drive my dad to work from Saco now to work in South Portland, and then drive me back to Kennedy Elementary. And that went on for about a year. I'm trying to think of now, and this is why my parents were so amazing. During all this jumping around and moving around and confusion, my dad starts a Cub Scout troop in Biddeford. My first best friend was Joe Potvin, the Brady Bunch of Biddeford at the time. But now my dad's completely engulfed in the social portrait of Biddeford, because he started his Cub Scout troop. And through starting that Cub Scout troop, he was the Cub Master. He as I got older, he became the head of the Boy Scout troop. He built East Biddeford Little League. From beginning to end, that was a rocky old field up and back at Kennedy Elementary. He actually built that field. And he was the president of that. And then as I got older, he became the president of East Biddeford Senior League. So you ask about my dad, somehow all that translated into me, who was looked at when I first got there. Kids would stare at me, and Joey was my buffer. The Podvins were my buffer. Like, he would just like go, "What are you looking at?" Like, don't, it's scared, blah blah blah, and But through my dad and my mom, who was a den mother for like 10 years, well after I left, I can remember coming home from football practice when I was in high school, and there were still kids at my house every Monday night. So a lot of the kids that grew up with me at the time actually came through my house and in some way were connected to either my dad, my mom, or myself. So, I mean, for any family, that would be pretty amazing, but it was amazing for us, or me, because when we first got there, I'm thinking back to the Blaine Motel and how we couldn't even find housing. So they flipped that completely, which was amazing to me. So that's to sort of answer that loaded question about my dad.
Uh-huh. Now, when you say that you couldn't find housing, do you think it's just that there wasn't much available, or were there?
It was a combination of both. Like, I can remember my dad. That's where a lot of my mother's, where the crying came from, because my dad would go in. There'd be an available rental, and he'd go in and he'd look at it and go, "No, that's not happening." So at the beginning, I think somehow they had to break through, and for people to accept them and me before they would sort of, I don't know, open up and allow us to be a part of the community. I mean, that's kind of a judgment call, but I know that sometimes it was just like lack of housing, but most of the time it was, it was a thing.
Now, do you remember what it was like the first day you went to school, or at the beginning when you went to school?
Oh, no. I remember the first day like it was yesterday. And that's what I mean. That first day, I don't know. Do you know the Potmans?
I don't personally, but...
Do you know that name?
Yes.
Okay. You probably know Marie LeBlanc, who was Joey's wife, who was like the hockey coach or something. But anyways, that first day, just stairs, like not stairs that you walk up, but stairs, people just glaring at me. And at some point during the day, Joey just came over, grabbed me, and included me in everything. Just like, and wouldn't let me say no. And so it really only took one day of that total, because the teachers were all cool. They wanted me to feel at home. But the kids they weren't being mean. They were just kind of confused, Like they've never seen a person with color. So, what's this? But it really only lasted maybe 1 2 days. And that went away like it was never there, which I'm so thankful for,
Now, had your parents done anything? Do you remember? Because I mean, you were still pretty young at the time. Do you remember if your parents did anything to prepare you for that first day?
Well, no. Well, see, one of the reasons that my dad accepted that job at GE was because my parents used to go to Maine. Oh, I'm forgetting something, but my parents used to go to Maine every summer. So we were always in Maine, and I always forget this part of my life. The summer before we moved to Maine, or no, when we first got to Maine, someplace in there, I'm always confused about this. There's a motel right up the street from Funtown. If you go north, it's about a half a mile on the right going towards Portland. My parents, it was in 68. My parents managed that motel for a whole summer. And I don't know where to insert that in the story because it's just like it's like a distant memory, but I remember being there. I remember my dad bought me this little puppy. I remember chasing fireflies in the backyard, so I was still really young. So it was like, we were used to going to Maine, but I don't think my parents really anticipated what it would be like for me to be thrust into a school as the only real minority. And I don't blame them for that because that's like one in about 20 things that they had to be concerned with. But it worked out, so, you know. And it wasn't even that hurtful. It was kind of like, years later when I looked at it, I was proud of the fact that I went through that and I came out of it no longer, I came out of it no longer being a person who looked at other people, not that I ever had, but from a racial standpoint. Because I was not an outcast, but I was different for a couple days. But then I wasn't different. I was just another little kid going to school. And it gave me a perspective. But we had always been that. We had always been that. This wasn't the first time that happened. We moved out of a Jewish community in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, when we moved to Maine. We were the only family of color in that whole community. Same thing. My first school was Abbey Color. It was on the Brown University campus. It was a finishing school, like I was in the second grade, and I was like learning about where silverware goes and all this weird stuff. But that was all kids from Brown, like younger kids of siblings who were at Brown. So Yeah, that wasn't the first time that had been the situation at all.
So I'm kind of curious about going back to your dad. You know, can you tell me a little bit about his upbringing, where he came from, what he had for an education? How did he get to the job that he had?
My dad was my dad and his brothers all came from Bermuda when they were kids. I'm not sure how old, but I'm thinking there was my dad and three other younger brothers, and they were all athletes. They went to a school in Providence called Hope High School. Again, right, like in that whole Brown area. And I think that's how he sort of, I don't know, he looked at that situation and decided that he was going to immerse me in that whole college thing. He didn't go to college. He worked just really hard. But he had the luxury of, when they came over here from Bermuda, of being with his three other brothers, the Wilson brothers, who are kind of known in Providence, or, they were. And he graduated from Hope, went into the Air Force, got out of the Air Force, and the other thing is, there's a gap because he had a prior marriage that I have three stepsisters by, and they were all like, or they were all like between 25 and 30 years older than me. So I was kind of like part of the second part of his life. And like I said, I was born when he was 40. So he and my mother was married to another man who was killed. He was an electrical worker, and he was killed. He was up on a pole, and he got electrocuted. There's this whole story about that. So they both kind of had lives before I was even like a thought, And it wasn't really, my dad was kind of like, he was real personable. He was like this jolly guy. He knew everybody's name. But when I was younger, he was working so hard and so much that he was not really, it wasn't until later in his life, in my early life, that he was engaging. He suddenly became like this everyman. But I can remember as a kid, I don't really remember as a real young kid. All I knew was when I'd get up to go to school, he was long gone to work. And I would be out playing. I'd come in and I'd see him for like an hour or something. And then I'd go to bed, and we'd do the whole thing again the next day. So, it wasn't until later in his life, later in my early years, that this whole relationship with my dad started to develop when we got to Maine. Maine really opened to me. I used to go home. I'd go someplace. I'd come home to my house, and all my friends' bikes would be, on the ground. I don't know if kids still do that, but we used to just throw our bikes on the ground and go in the house and never worried about them getting stolen. It was Biddeford. Nothing ever happened in Biddeford. And I'd go in the house, and there was no one there but my mom. This happened so many times, I can't believe it. And I'd be like, Mom, where is everyone? Oh, they're going to the beach with their dad. Like, he would take, carfuls of kids to the beach and the fun town, and I didn't even have to be there. If I wasn't there, and they could just go to my house, I guess, say, Mr. Wilson, blah, 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 and he would just take them, get in the car, because we always had a station wagon. So, yeah, that's what I remember about my dad. He knew everyone's name. He knew everyone's nicknames. I mean, everyone.
So
I don't know.
So you got the sense that not only were the kids accepting of you and your family, but did you have that kind of interaction with the parents as well, the parents of all these kids?
Me?
Well, you and the family, and was there some exchange?
Oh, no. 100%. Mr. Parkman was like my second dad. Mr. Labonte, who was my little league coach, was like my other second dad. Oh. I got into BC because Keith, I can't remember his last name. Keith's dad, who was a teacher, wrote me my letter. By then, I had done my own thing. I had already run the gamut of every sport there is to play, and my father got me started, and I took the ball and ran with it. But no, I was without a doubt. But it all came up because my parents immersed themselves in Biddeford so much that I was like just a son of Biddeford.
Now, I think you had mentioned to me that your mother is. Tell me a little bit about her background.
Again, see, my mother's a Narragansett Indian. Her maiden name is White, Bernice White. She's one of 4 children. And once again, this is sort of an ongoing theme. The Whites grew up in Quinton, Rhode Island. Only family of color in the entire neighborhood. Again, my uncle Billy is a detective. He's like the head of the Shriners in the Rhode Island chapter. I don't know. My family had this knack for going where no one else had gone before, I guess, and kind of like being a part of it. She was a nurse.
Did she work outside the home? You said she was a nurse?
Yeah, when I was younger, she worked. But again, she was. As I get older, they started to get to the point in their lives where they were kind of, well, not my dad, but my mom kind of was pulling back. So my mother would do like, my mother became the night that my mother passed away, she was on private duty. She would take private nursing jobs. That's what she did when we got to Maine. And she was on duty that night in Goose Rocks. And she passed away. But yeah, that's what my mom did. She was a great person too.
So if we, how do you know how they met?
I
Do you
I'm
know?
not sure, but I think it's through one of my aunts. See, my mother's two sisters. My family's so messed up. Well, it's not messed up, but it's just my mother's two sisters, Virginia and Gladys, married two oil guys, the Turner brothers. So two sisters married two brothers. And they were like loaded. They had oil companies, and it was just obscene how that worked out. But I can remember my father always talking about how they used to all spend a lot of time in Boston, in the whole nightlife of Boston. Like they had all these pictures of them sitting at clubs and blah, 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 blah. So I'm thinking somehow that whole group was instrumental in bringing my mom and dad together. But that's all speculation.
Okay, so I don't know how long. You said the first place you lived in Biddeford was at Hills Beach. Were you there for quite a while?
No, we were there for that one winter. But again, I've got so many friends from Hills Beach that in that little time that we were there, that it's like I've got my soccer friends from when I lived there. I've got the Hills Beach kids from when I lived at the Hills Beach. Because there weren't that many kids at Hills Beach. So it was kind of like this group, you know, that would hang out on the beach and playing in the snow and, you know, the Plamondons and the St. Anges and
And so the neighborhood kids were, do you remember what it was like when you first got into the neighborhood? You talked about when you went to school on the first day. Do you remember what it was like when you first went to establish a relationship with the neighborhood kids?
Well, the kids that were my age, they were all the same group of kids that went to the same school as I. We got on the same school bus in the morning, went to Kennedy Elementary, got on the bus at night, and went home and just, you know, we're just regular kids. So breaking into the neighborhood was connected to breaking into being accepted at school. once that happened, everything else sort of fell into place. It's so funny how once the stigma was broken, it's like a dam opened up, and we were so involved in everything that whole race thing just kind of like literally just went poof and disappeared. It was never an issue ever again. I was like my class president in junior high. How does that happen? I was the most popular kid in the school. I'm not bragging, but I'm just saying. I went from that first couple of days to kind of the top of the heap somehow. I don't know. I was involved in all those sports and everything, and we were really successful in all the sports that we played. So I don't know, if you put it all together, it just all worked out. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, so tell me about some of your memories from school. What sports did you start out with? What grade did you start out with?
oh Lord, sports. Another loaded question. My first, what was the first one? Kennedy Patriots basketball. I was in the 6th grade. Mr. Provost gave me the nickname Big Thunder, which everyone still to this day calls me, which is funny as can be. Next came, when we lived in, I started out playing for my first year of Little League was in soccer. So again, I was immersed in the whole soccer thing. I played 1 year of Little League in soccer. We moved to Hills Beach. I became a part of that whole thing. And then I played my second year of Little League at the Kerry Little League, which is out in Pool Road. And then my dad built East Biddeford Little League, my last 2 years of Little League, and I played out there, and we won that league 2 years in a row. But my dad also started this other tournament, this citywide tournament it was a tournament between the 3 Little Leagues in Biddeford, the Kerry, West Biddeford Little League, and East Biddeford Little League. And whoever won those leagues, we'd have this city tournament. So much stuff. Oh, my Lord. And then I started playing Pop Warner at, 9. And then the whole football thing is just I could write a book on the football thing, and I'm not kidding. In the 7th grade, we won our league. No, in the 7th grade. In the 7th grade. 7th grade was junior high, so it was 7th and 8th. We won that junior high school league. But I also broke a kid's leg, which that's a bad memory for me during that 7th year season. And then in the 8th grade, Mr. Ginnard, our coach, was like an animal. He was like he was like someone to fear, like have nightmares about, and but I became one of his, like, I don't know, little soldiers. And one day we were doing this drill at practice where, this is going to sound, because you didn't play football, but, and not that this is, I don't know what this is, but there was a thing that we would do where whoever didn't hustle during practice, we build this mound of dirt and shove their face in it. I don't know what that was all about, but that was a Mr. Ginnard ritual. Well, we did that to the wrong kid. We did that to Keith Loyndon, whose parents were on the school board, and it became like a big deal. And so I didn't play football my 8th grade year, which was kind of unheard of with my friends. They were all really mad at me, but nothing I could do about it. But then freshman year, we won our freshman year league. But halfway through the season, now this is a big part of my life. Halfway through the season, I got moved up to varsity, but I didn't play. I practiced with the freshmen. When our practice ended, I would run across the street to Biddeford.
You can, go ahead. I'm just going to ignore that.
Oh, okay. I would run across the street to Biddeford Field and practice with the senior, with the varsity. And that went on like that right up until, and this is really weird how this happened, right up until the week of our freshman championship game. So I would play with the freshmen, but I would also suit up with the varsity and go to their games. So I was playing freshman, junior varsity, and varsity all at once. And we went to Deering that Saturday, and we used to play as freshmen on a Thursday. The Saturday prior to the Thursday of the championship game, we're at Deering, and Bernie Fossier gets hurt, one of the other kids, one of the seniors. And Coach Terry calls me over. He goes, all right, I need you to go in. And I'm like, okay. He goes, wait a minute. So I'm ready to run out on the field. He grabs me and he goes, now listen, if you play one play here, you can't play on Thursday. You're no longer a freshman. You're now officially a varsity football player. So me being a kid, I was like, I want to play. So I go in, and sure enough, the first time I touch the ball, I go like 86 yards as a freshman. And I end up like with over 200 yards that first game as a freshman, replacing a senior, but I can't play with my junior and with my freshman team for the championship. So again, there was a lot of controversy behind that. They won the game anyways, and I just kept playing with the varsity. But I ended up being a varsity football player for 4 years, not 3, because at that time in high school football, you had to be a freshman for a year. So, yeah, and that just started a whole thing of, until I got hurt as a senior, we just well, Biddeford High School football, that Wayne's itself. They're a juggernaut. I don't know if they still are, but they were. And I know that the schools are kind of mixed now, and it's probably a little different leagues, but yeah. And then I played baseball for 4 years. Ran track at the same time and wrestled. So I was a busy kid, to say the least.
I was just going to say, what did you do in your spare time?
Yeah, right. And it's funny because at that time, there literally wasn't any spare time at all. You'd go from practicing one sport. Well, there was summertime. That was the only spare time you got, but that was cut short because the last 2 weeks of August before you go to school, you got to go to death camps, which is double sessions in like 102-degree heat, 2 sessions a day. So summer was cut short. But once that started, there was never a day, like you'd go from football practice, the day the season ended, that next day, you were immediately into basketball practice. Now, with basketball, I went to my parents and Joey's parents sent us to Mount Katahdin basketball camp one summer, which is 2 weeks. Pocono Mountain basketball camp, which was 2 weeks. So even during the summer, when, like you said, free time, we were still like playing Little League and going to basketball camps. So yeah, there really wasn't a lot of free time. I don't know where we even found time for girlfriends because it's or anything else.
What about schoolwork?
Well, the coaches were pretty adamant on, I mean, you had to have passing grades. I couldn't play any of these sports. But I was always, from the time they did an IQ test on me when I was at Abbey Teller, second grade or something, and it came up pretty high. So from then on, when I first got to Biddeford, they didn't really have to do an assessment of me because I had just taken that IQ test, like in that same year. So I was in like college prep courses my entire life. Thank God, because I went to college, and a good college. But I was always a good student, so for some reason, school was never a problem. Like, getting the grades were like, Joey, same thing. He went to Colby. We were all like just good students. I don't know.
One of the things I wondered about is, so you were very accepted with in Biddeford in the school system. Now, with all the sports that you played, you ended up having to play teams from other communities. Were those experiences just as accepting?
Yep. Well, because I knew everyone. I knew all the kids from Stanford for some reason. Thornton, the kids playing at Thornton, I'm playing like some of my still in life best friends whenever we played Thornton. You know, then most of the other teams, it was just normal rivalries, you know? Like Portland was, they were like, you know, they had, their numbers were, you know, way up, you know, we had like 200 and something or something kids to pull from. You know, they had like 500 kids to pull from, so it was always like, all right, we're not letting them. Same thing with Westbrook. And what happens in sports, because you play the same kids in every sport every year. It's the same kids. Your age group, it's the same group of kids. So y'all, I mean, not just me, but y'all just, it becomes like this friendship between all those kids. Like, you know, like, hey, how you doing? You know, like, you played against these kids since you were like, you know, 9 or something. So, yeah, that was never a problem for me or for any of my teammates. I mean, the funny thing about soccer was Thornton and Biddeford are big rivals. So there was a rivalry there, but every kid on that team was like a friend of mine who I had run the streets of Saco, if you can do that, as a younger kid. So yeah, that was just part of it.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned is you said there really wasn't any time for dating, but was there? Did you have a chance to do any dating?
All right, remember I said, I think I told you that they did one of these on my family right after I was in college. I think I came home one summer and they were like, we're going to do a piece on your family. And this is a real touchy, sensitive, uncool part of my life. In that I don't want to insult anyone, but the truth is kind of the truth. The racism that left in every part of my life when I was real young when it came to dating my daughter, that was a different thing. I don't know if you can understand that, but most of I was involved with a ton of girls, which again, just take that with a grain of salt. But the one girl who I saw all the way through high school, everyone knew about the relationship. I mean, everyone knew about the relationship, except for her parents. We kept that hidden. We not only kept it hidden through 4 years of high school, we kept it hidden through college. We moved in together in Foxborough. We were still hiding that relationship. Old Irish family, they weren't accepting of me at all. But the relationship, it was one of those things where, like, the more they tried to suppress it, the more intense it got, kind of. I don't know. And, yeah, that, and then I was seeing her cousin before that. Same thing, hidden relationship. Now, this may have just been a product of, and this is going to sound trite, but picking the wrong girl, I don't know. There may have been families in Biddeford who would have been fine with me dating their daughter. It didn't seem that way. But, and then there'd be breakups when I'd start dating some other girl, but then we'd always get back together. And so that went on, and it was a big, big, big romance. She was like the gymnastic queen of high school at the time. And, you know, it was like this big, like, Mr. Kerry, my football coach, who was also like my mentor, he was like my man. He would call us the young marrieds, you know, like, and try to sway me away from that because there was so much else going on in my life that I had to be concerned with. That all that drama in that it kind of sucked my soul, kind of. Having to deal with that. And of course, I didn't listen, you know. Her best friend, Bianca Bennett, Dr. Bennett's daughter, if you go towards Maplewood Avenue, towards the high school, and right before you take the right, going down the hill, is a big white house right there on the left. That's Dr. Bennett's house. Dr. Bennett loved me. He was our team doctor. He would have been perfectly fine with me dating his daughter Bianca, who was in my wheelhouse anyways, but that never developed. I stayed with the relationship that the parents weren't accepting of. So, this is just a real touchy subject to me.
Did you ever, especially as a youngster or a teenager, you know, think it would be nice if you could be around kids at other schools who were of the same background, or just not an issue?
Well, I mean, I think the reason that probably never came to mind was there weren't any. There weren't any. We were like, there was one other African-American family who lived in Portland, who the McIntyres, who were also athletes. And then there were these two brothers from Bangor who were, they were mixed family, and I didn't even know about them until my junior year, when I found out that they were also football players and were also on their way to Boston College. So, yeah, it's not like, and well, it didn't matter to me. Black, white, Indian, Japanese, it didn't matter to me, because my friends were my friends. I didn't care what nationality they were. I could care less. And that's the one good thing I got from all that was, and I still to this day, I don't care where you're from or who your parents are or what color you are or, I don't really care. I care if you're a nice person. And I care if you're, if you're caring and you're human and spiritual and, I care about certain things that have nothing to do with race at all. The day that I was accepted at Kennedy Elementary, all that went away. I never looked at people. It was like the world accepted me. I now accept the world completely. I'll never look at color again or see it because the color in me disappeared. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
You're not laughing at me, are you?
Oh, that's the last thing. That's the last thing I'm doing. That's the last thing I'm doing for sure. So tell me about your decision to go to college, about that journey.
Oh, I didn't decide that. My mother decided that the day she sent me as a 4-year-old to a 5-year-old to go to school on the Brown campus. That was written in stone from that day on. I mean, I was literally a little kid in a polo shirt walking on Brown University campus, walking through the main gate of Brown University in the 2nd grade, going to class with the Brown kids. Like, I think that was kind of like already decided for me way before that happened. But it also was kind of weird because Abby Teller was, well, first of all, it was on the Brown campus, but it was run by nuns. I don't know how those two things come together, Brown and nuns, but it was a progressive school, a progressive finishing school. And I took a lot of heat from the other kids in my family because the things that they were learning and the things that I was learning were so different. And I think there was some jealousy there. When someone's doing something different that you don't, it's a mystery to you. For kids, it's easier to just make fun of it than try to understand it. And then finally, right before this will all be in that bio, right before we left Rhode Island for Maine, my mom pulled me out of Abby Teller and put me in the West Street School because we had moved to Pawtucket, and it was like right down the street. Like because they used to come get me in a Volkswagen bus every morning to go to Abby Teller, but it was also, it wasn't free. You know what I mean? My parents had to pay for me to go to that school. And, I went to West Street School in Pawtucket. When we moved to Pawtucket, and again, here it comes again, we lived one street over from Blackstone Boulevard. Blackstone Boulevard is it's a boulevard. There's a strip of land down the middle, maybe 40 feet wide, 2 streets, one going one way, one going the other way, on each side of the boulevard. And the boulevard is millionaires. The whole boulevard is just millionaires. We moved one street and back of that in a Jewish community. So I don't know. As a theme in my life, I don't know if my father was avoiding, like, immersing me in places that he felt I could get in trouble in. You know, he was shielding me from something. Which I'm really thankful for, because certain parts of Providence you don't want to live in, or I don't want to live in, or well, like any place.
So I go back.
Better.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so out of so when it came time for you to choose, so obviously you were going to college. So when it came time to decide which college, how did you go about making that decision?
Well, it wasn't really that hard, because BC, who was part of the Big East at the time, was kind of like the biggest name on this coast for a school. There was Syracuse, and then if you went south, there was like Pitt, and there was always the Ivy schools. I mean, I got recruited to Dartmouth, and I opted not to go there. I got recruited to Colby. I opted not to go there. I opted to go to the biggest name school in sort of the wildest city that I knew of. Boston, just for some reason, with the Red Sox being there, and the Celtics being there, and I had been there to visit. And plus, I don't know if you've ever been to BC, but it's like one of the nicest campuses on the planet. So it had the appeal of being a Division I school. It had the appeal of being, I mean, BC right now is, I think, 35th on the list of like 4,000 schools ranked. And it was then. It had the appeal of being in Boston, but I also applied to USC. I applied to Orono just because it was like my backup. I didn't want to go to a state school. Oh yeah, I liked the fact that BC was a private school. It was a college, not a university. But I think most of all, it was the football part that I wanted to be an Eagle. And it wasn't really that hard. Like I said, I could have gone to Dartmouth. I turned that down, both grade-wise and athletically. I was accepted both ways. And, you know, I wanted to go to Boston College.
And what was the transition like going from Biddeford to Boston College?
Initially, it was, no, but initially it was kind of lonely. Like, when I remember that day my parents dropped me off, I was like, okay, this is like summer camp, but without all the fun, I thought. Little did I know what was about to happen. It was at Keene State, which is right up the road, like 45 minutes into New Hampshire. So that was another reason this was by. But before long, I met as soon as I met all the other football players and that whole thing started up, it was game on. You know, as far as trying really hard to stay in the books, because Boston was a huge distraction. A fun one, a good one, but maybe not so good for how much money you were spending at the time to be there.
Did you?
Plus, there were other kids. Bianca, Mr. Burnett's daughter, was at Tufts. Another friend, Kathy Sheen, was at Bentley. These are all schools that are like within 10, 15 minutes of where I was. Donna Roboto, another real good friend, was at Regis, which is the baby sister of Boston College. Yeah, that's funny. Mentioning all the girls. So yeah, there were. Then the girl that graduated first in my class was at BC. Valerie Mantis, Bianca's best friend, she was at Boston College. There were just a lot of kids from Biddeford High School, like within striking distance. Like, I didn't have to know the kids at the school. All I had to do was know one kid at any of those schools, and then I knew a ton of kids at those schools. So making that transition, which the lonely part only lasted about a week until I kind of figured the whole scheme of things out. And then I did something that you're not supposed to do, but I brought my car to school as a freshman. You're not supposed to have your car. And but that gave me access to go any place. And I also met up with a kid from my roommate went to Phillips Andover. He was from Andover, Mass, and he was a football player. And he was like a lot like me, and we became like best friends. So yeah, we became get in trouble friends is what we became. But yeah, that transition didn't take long to sort of take root, and I stopped going home during the summers. I just stayed in Boston, which I shouldn't have done, because little did I know, my mom was 2 years away from passing away, and so those last 2 summers, I was in Boston still being a BC kid when I could have been home spending time with my mom. But, that's all hindsight. You never know what's going to happen, obviously.
What did you decide to pursue academically? What was your major?
Education, secondary education with history as my discipline.
What were you thinking? So were you thinking at the time of becoming a teacher?
You know how you have favorite teachers and not so favorite teachers, and I had 2 that were so impactful in my life, and they were both football coaches. One of them was Mr. Champagne, who was my 6th grade math teacher. Nicest guy, nicest man on the planet. And that was in the 6th grade. 3 years later, as a freshman, and I move up to varsity, who's the varsity backfield coach? Mr. Champagne. So that guy stayed in my life. He was in my life. He left my life for 2 years. Then he was back in my life for the next 4 years. One of my faves. But my favorite teacher was my head football coach, Coach Kerry, who was from Chelmsford, Massachusetts. And he was a high school history teacher. And a lot of times, I'm true for anyone, certain teachers I already knew the material, so they would just kind of like almost put me to sleep and be like, come on, pick it up. Mr. Kerry wasn't like that. Mr. Kerry had the coolest stories that went along with his lessons that I was captivated the whole time. So, yeah, I wanted to be him.
And is that what you ended up getting your degree in?
Yep.
And so, got a helicopter going over.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's...
That's background.
Did you end up having any like part-time jobs through high school and college?
Well, I mean, summer jobs. The people that own Old Orchard Beach, the two families who own Palace Play Lane and the White Way, the two sides of the streets, probably changed now. But one of them was somehow closely related to Biddeford. So during the summers, all the operators on all the rides, the beach, were kind of from Biddeford. They were all Biddeford football players. So that was my summer job, which I did for 3 years. The only other job, because I really didn't have time for a job, was during baseball, my senior year, I was trying to make money because I was going off to school. I was a bag boy at Shaw's in Saco. And then in college, I was on if you played football and they would give you a stipend, but you had to work like a job, like a little menial job. I worked as a lifeguard for the Brookline Parks and Rec for like, I don't know, kindergartners or something, just these little kids that I would have to watch. That was my job.
So let's see, what year was it that you graduated from high school?
77.
And did you say somewhere along the way that you even were like the prom king or something?
Oh, yeah. I was, and I couldn't even go because there would have been pictures of that. So I had to let my best friend, and this happened twice, as a freshman prom king and a senior prom king. I couldn't go either time. I had to let someone else take my girlfriend because that would have outed my relationship. But yeah, I was that twice.
Now that's elected by the students, right?
Yep.
So you weren't able to go to the dance at all?
Nope.
How did that feel?
Not good. Not good at all. I remember for one of them, I just stayed home, which that was a really bad one. But the other one of the girls, my best friend's sister, Ann Cosgrove, who's still around Biddeford, who's an angel of the first order, knew I couldn't go. So a couple days before that was going to happen, I was over Mickey's playing basketball because that was one of our spots for playing basketball. And she came out and she said, "Skip, I want you at my house on Friday night." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I know you can't go and you're not going to be alone. So you come to my house on Friday night, we'll hang out." I was like, "Okay." And, which was kind of weird because it was Mickey's oldest sister, and I had the biggest crush on her that you can imagine. So this was going to be like a glad not to be alone, but a really like nervous night. I remember sweating the whole time, going, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm just sitting here with Ann." But it was the nicest gesture that anyone could have made, you know. And I had to swallow my best friend going to prom with my girlfriend. That wasn't cool.
Did you ask him to do that?
Yep. I didn't want her not to go. That would have been right.
So, talk to me about through your anything in particular that you remember as a highlight when you were in college?
I mean, just other than being at BC every day, that was a blessing. The rest of it, and the thing about Boston College is I didn't play 4 years of ball because I ripped my leg and I was done. So the rest of my time was, for the first time in my life, the rest of my time there, I was just like a normal student. Like it was just about going to class and not playing a sport. So that's a little disheartening. But yeah, I just think as a highlight, just waking up and being at Boston College every day was like the coolest thing anyone could ask for. Being in Newton, that whole area, it's a bunch of gated communities and just really nice. And the ironic thing was when I got my first, I eventually went to work for UPS, and my first driving job I ended up driving at Boston College. So I was right back at home. And it gave me the same feeling of there's no place I've ever been that I like being more than here. So I guess I can't really pick one specific thing. Playing ball was great, but I ended up getting hurt.
So tell me about that. How did you get hurt? Tell me about your injury.
I didn't even get hit. I just caught a punt, went to go return it, and I was a running back, so there was a lot of lateral movement, a lot of over here, over there, a lot of hopping around. And I planted my leg and just heard the pop. And didn't really know what had just happened. Went back to the huddle. Went to run the next play, and every time I put weight on it, it would just kind of buckle. So they were cool. They sent me to... I was so lucky in so many ways, with so many things that you wouldn't think of. They sent me to New England Sports Clinic in Danvers, Mass. And the guy who operated on my knee is the same doctor who, at the time, operated on the Bruins, who those guys have big knee issues also. So I got the best doctor that you possibly could have. But in college football, certain injuries, once you step out of the game for any amount of time, that's only 4 years. Stepping back in and rehabbing and catching back up isn't always viable. It doesn't work that way. Time runs out before you're effective again. So, and I did eventually, obviously, I recovered, you know. And the other thing being, once you step out, other kids, younger kids, come in to take your place. And, yeah, so that kind of ended the football thing.
What year was that? What year were you in school?
79.
So you would have been a sophomore?
Yeah.
So tell me about the transition after you graduated from college, what your plans were, but how did your career path develop?
That was like that just fell into place. I started working. There was another kid, Mark Thorburn, from BC, who was working at UPS in Norwood, Massachusetts, which is just south of Boston. And he was working in the hub as a supervisor on this night shift. And we were good friends and stuff, and we were just talking one day, and he said, yeah, well, you know, you could always come work for us. And I was like, and it was only a 4-hour shift, which meant, oh, great, that's nothing. You know, 8 hours, that's a lot of time, but 4 hours, I can do that. Little did I know that working for UPS, especially in the hub, is probably one of the hardest jobs anybody can ever try to work. I mean, it is brutal. It's the buzzer goes off, and it's like, pedal to the metal. It's just like straight out. So,
what is the hub?
oh, it's where they process they process the packages. And a hub means that they're like satellite places where the packages come in, but all the packages end up at the hub, which is where all the belts and all the slides and, you know, the Amazon commercial where all the packages are going every way and all that.
Right.
That's a hub.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have trucks that pull up to the door. They're full of packages. You got people that unload them. Worst job in the world. You bent over the whole time picking up. It's like, you know how when people pick up one packages, they'll go, lift with your legs, you know? Well, this is like that scenario, like 10,000 times a night. You know, it's brutal. Then there are sorters, people, the packages go to them, and then they look at the label, then they send it one way, and then there are pickers who are the people that stand in front of each truck, the destinations, that when the packages get there, they have to look at the packages going by in the belt that are going by at breakneck speed and pick out the packages that actually go in that truck. We'll say 04005, what's that, Biddeford, right?
Right.
So they'd be looking for all the 0400 packages going by them, and they'd have to somehow get to them and pull them off the belt and throw that in the truck. So, but once you get through that, if you can stay there through that and you can last, UPS is a Fortune 500 company. I mean, that goes without saying why you wouldn't want to work there. And, excuse me. And so when I left BC, I just automatically stayed with that job. And I was promoted. I became UPS management. And I ended up working there for the next 18 years. So that kind of just sort of happened. But it was a good thing.
So did you stay? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also drove. It was weird. I went from a package handler in the hub to being a supervisor, and then doing something that at the time, not just myself, but at the time, no one had done because there's a conflict of interest here. Oh, I also went to 2 years of management, or not management, management training. It was kind of like geared towards UPS, but it was still management training. You got a degree in this whole thing, or a plaque and a certificate, everything. But I went from being a package handler to a supervisor, and a supervisor at UPS is like, all you do is yell. That's all you do is yell at people. What are you looking at? And then they needed, at the time, there was this big campaign by FedEx that they were the front door deliverers and we were the back door deliverers. So UPS wanted to change to that. So they needed people they could put on the road that would make the company look good. So they immediately went to frontline supervisors. But to do that, you had to go from being a Teamster to being UPS management and back to being a Teamster. And that was unheard of. But they did it anyways, and Yeah, but you also make a lot of money for that company. I don't know if people know that, but you also have to work 12-hour days doing that, humping packages all day long. And it seems mindless, but it's really not at all.
So you were a driver for them, and did you
Supervisor and a package handler. Yeah.
and that's kind of like what you did for 18 years with them?
Yeah.
And did you go work someplace else after that? Or are you still working?
No, because actually that, that plus playing ball, every ball game there is on the planet, pretty much. I've since had both of my hips replaced. Yeah. I was also working for Scandinavian Design, but when I left the UPS, that's part of the reason I'm in New York. I decided I'm going to go back to school and get my master's, you know. So I picked St. Rose, which is in Albany, to go to do some post-grad work. I was going to do St. Rose and UAlbany and get my master's. And before I could do that, this hip thing started to be a real problem. And I ended up having to have both hips replaced.
Now, can I ask you, did you ever get married?
Uh, No, but Anna and I lived together in Foxborough and in Norwood for tw- 12 of those years. We were together that whole time that I worked for UPS. Because she was a nurse. Again, the nurse thing popping up. Nurses all over the place. And she worked at literally every hospital in Boston. Everyone. So we were pretty well off. Bought one condo, sold it, bought another one in Foxborough. And like I said, that we were still in hide in plain sight mode. You know, everyone else knew we were there. Everyone would come. You know, we'd have dinner parties, the whole schmeal, and but the couple of times that her parents came to visit, see, this wasn't good for me. I mean, I'm not whining, but I know that it had some sort of negative effect on not my ego, because I had more than stuff to feel good about myself about, but we would have to hide all my clothes, all my belongings, erase me from our house for the time that her parents were going to be there. And I would have to disappear also. We had 2 vehicles, so that was cool. And we always worried that her father was going to go, "Where's the truck?" You know, because I would be off in the truck. And I don't know, that just wasn't good for my soul. And that had been going on kind of my whole adult life, you know, since I was like, what, 15. I don't know.
That had to be
So,
difficult.
this is backtracking. When you asked me about acceptance with, families and all that, the truth is kind of leaking out here. You know what I mean?
So do you stay connected with Biddeford at all, or people in Biddeford?
um, yeah, for a while. I mean, we lived in literally, like, you could look out our backyard during the winter when there weren't leaves on the trees and see Foxborough Stadium, like, less than a quarter of a mile from our house. So whenever there was like a big concert, like the Stones or U2 or something, all of our friends would come to our house because you could just park your car at our house, at our condo, and just walk down the street to the stadium. So there were things like that. And for a while, I was still going back to celebrate people's birthdays, and I would DJ birthday parties, and that went on for a little while. But her parents finally won that battle, and then I broke up or separated it or whatever. You know how you do that, like on This Is from Seinfeld, when you break up, you get to keep certain friends, and she gets to keep certain friends, and that whole thing. It's sort of like I fell on my sword and just let Biddeford, because she still had family in Biddeford. I didn't. My parents were both passed away. So she could go home. I really couldn't go home. I had no home there anymore. So I think slowly I started to, I still talk to people. I talk to people every day. Betty sent me masks the other day. Sent me like these homemade masks. He's in Biddeford. Dakota and Dan Dutcher and John Kennedy, all those people I still talk to on social media. But if it wasn't for social media, and before social media got so mainstream, there was a gap there where, no, I wasn't really connected to Biddeford that much. Alan even. I wouldn't have even talked to Alan Castervan if it wasn't for all this. And Alan lived like 2 houses from me as a kid on Graham Street. We grew up like literally 2 houses apart.
So you must have been a little surprised when Alan reached out to you and to ask you if you'd be interested in doing this.
Well, yes and no, because I know Alan. It wouldn't surprise me at all that he would, because he's a real open-minded, cool dude. He's the mayor. Ooh. That's a big deal to me. I brag about it every day. My best friend's the mayor of Biddeford. Whenever I talk about Biddeford, and I was happy to do it. And if he didn't think that there was something here that needed to be said, he wouldn't bother me. He wouldn't be bothered. He obviously thinks that there's something from our past growing up that may need to be told, I guess, you know. Yeah.
Now, is there anything else that you would want to share that maybe just didn't come out because I didn't ask the right question?
Um, I'm sure there is, but, you know, yeah, I've been through a big, a lot of the stuff I haven't thought of in years, you know. And then again, there's a lot that I think about every day. I do miss Biddeford. I know that since the hip surgeries, I couldn't drive there for a while. So I got rid of my car and I bought these really expensive bikes, and that's what I do every day. This whole corona isn't sitting well with me because now I'm like stuck in the house and I need to be mobile because of my hips. But I know that if I did, or when I do get a vehicle, the first place I'm going to go is back to my hometown, without a doubt. I know my friends are, every time I talk to them, they're like, when are you going to come home? And Alan said that the other day, like, get your butt up here so we can have a beer, you know? And I wish I could. But I'm also collecting Social Security plus my UPS pension, and it's not going to, it doesn't equate to anything I've ever met or made in my life. So I'm kind of just trying not to think about how I might be stuck here right now. But yeah, I don't know. I miss Biddeford. I miss my friends. I always get these texts from like the little group of friends who are really close to me, and they're sending me pictures of them at Fenway, and you know that doesn't sit well because I need to be in that group. Sure, there were some things that I didn't share, but then again, I think I probably like talked your ear off. So.
Well, I know that one question I usually like to wrap up with is, what is something you'd want to make sure that people take away from hearing your story?
Just, you know, don't ever let there be roadblocks to your goals and dreams. because from how this whole thing started to where it reached its high point, no one could have ever imagined that that would happen. But I mean, that's true of so many people's lives. And mine was all led, like, we were never homeless, we were never, you know, my dad was never jobless, so we were always secure. But there were other roadblocks that had to be broken down. And they were. So I don't know, just you never know, like how life's gonna turn things over for you. But I know for me, I accomplished things that I couldn't imagine. I had more opportunity to do things than so many people, and take advantage of those opportunities. Because they're blessings that if you don't pay attention, they'll just fizzle. They'll just go away. So, I don't know, that might be a little dark, but
You're speaking to, it obviously comes from the heart.
yeah, well, you still want me to send you that bio info?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do now, Skip, is I'm going to stop recording. If you want to hold on for just a second, I do want to say thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. So thank you for doing that, Skip.
You're welcome. Thank you for being interested.